to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee, and today we delve into the world of Asian art. Join us as we explore groundbreaking exhibitions and expertise in the field with an esteemed curator and art historian based in Baltimore. My guest has earned numerous accolades and holds the position of Associate Curator of Asian Art at the Walters Art Museum. Please welcome Dany Chan. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for coming on. Thank you for making the time. And, you're in your office with the real books behind you and actual real things. I'm in my home office and there are Funko Pops behind me. So we're on very different sides of this sort of Friday conversation where we're doing this. But definitely I wanted to chat, and I'm glad we're able to do this. And before we get into sort of the main topics of today's conversation, I wanted to open it up and, give you the space to introduce yourself and maybe share the highlight of your week. I think we don't ask each other that enough. What's going on in your world? That's great. So if you will.
Oh, sure. Hi, I'm Dany Chan, and I serve as the Associate Curator of Asian Art at the Walters Art Museum in Baltimore, Maryland. This is my fourth year working at the Walters. Before I came to the Walters, I was actually a curator in San Francisco at the Asian Art Museum. And I was there for a total of 10 years. So right out of grad school, and spent 10 years there. And, looking back, I feel like that was where I received my real world training on how to be a curator. I learned a lot.
Yeah.
So, and, let's say, this week, I would say the highlight of my week was yesterday. I gave a talk at the Women's Club of Roland Park. And, one of the most rewarding aspects of my work as a curator is actually when I get these opportunities to give talks or lectures to the public. And so yesterday, I gave a talk on the meaning of flowers in Asian art, to coincide with their garden and art theme.
Yeah.
And, I've never worked with the club before, so it was great to make a new connection. But I also found that the audience there were super engaging, because in a way I love how people who come to my talks, they're there because they have some sort of interest in what I have to say. Yeah. And so it was really gratifying that we were able to bond over a shared mutual interest of flowers and art.
That's great. That's great to have those sort of finding your people sort of situations.
Yes.
And I may have added a flower question later. See, you give yourself more work to do. That's great. So, and thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the just sort of that highlight. That's really cool. I mean, if I was interviewing you, let's say again tomorrow, hopefully this is in that highlight conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that'd be great. So going back a little bit, the beginning, and I know you touched on sort of that the first art job, you were a little bit ahead, the first sort of art job. But when did that passion around art and around I guess being activated and recognizing art and creativity begin? When was that for you?
I would have to go all the way back to when I was a kid, in the 1980s. So my family and I immigrated to the U.S. in the early 1980s, and we settled in Revere, Massachusetts. It was right outside of Boston. And there was a large immigrant Cambodian community there during the early 80s. And there was a local video rental shop that rented out episodes of these, of Korean drama these days. Well, this was the Chinese Hong Kong equivalent of that. So it was TV episodes of these shows that were, loosely based off of Chinese history, myths, and legends. So they wore fantastical, historical costumes. They did, they had great fight sequences with kung fu, and they had powers. They were, they had supernatural dealings with supernatural beings. And so in the 1980s, apparently it was the golden age of that type of costume dramas coming out of Hong Kong.
Sure.
And so every week we would get new episodes that we can rent out, and they were dubbed in the Cambodian language. And that was when I fell in love with sort of like ancient China. I thought China was like that, with costumes and sword fighting and magic. And only later I found out that no, that doesn't exist anymore, except through the, historical Chinese art.
Yeah.
And I have to say, that was when I first fell in love with like Chinese art and culture.
That's really cool. It's really cool. And being able to kind of tap back into like being exposed, I think
Mm-hmm.
there's, with this sort of push of highlighting and amplifying like, art and like history from various cultures, it's like, oh, it can kind of spark that interest. And I think that's why the sort of broader conversation around art and around creativity that brings in maybe conversations from different cultures that weren't getting sort of that same attention as sort of the classics and the traditional and all of that sort of stuff. If we're being very honest, the very sort of like white art world,
Yeah.
and being able to bring in like, oh, here's your history a little bit, and let's like have folks that are representative of the culture and can speak of the culture and speak on like the history and give them that sort of space. I think that's very important.
Yeah, and I didn't get it through my schooling because there was, the public school system that I went to did not have a strong art program at all.
Mm.
Like we had, a visual arts um thing where we have art teachers who teach you how to paint, etc. But I have no such skill or aptitude for that. But we had good science teachers. And so I actually went to college hoping to be like an astrophysicist. So that was like I had a science major. I went in with a science major. However, after a week or a month there, and I finally realized, oh my God, I can study the Chinese language. I can learn about Asian art history. It was that kind of exposure that I didn't know those types of learning existed.
Yeah,
And so I changed my major within that first month,
it's great.
to East Asian studies with a Chinese language minor.
That's the impact.
Yeah.
I had the experience of going to an HBCU, and similar as you were describing like earlier, I wanted to be a comic book artist. I wanted to be an illustrator, and that was what I was into. I spent all of my time doing it, and I was one of those kids that would quickly complete a test, like rush through the test, get that B. Knew I was good enough to get the B, right? And I was like, I'm going to draw X-Men for the next 15 minutes. That's what I'm drawing. And it was a little bit of entrepreneurship thing because I was selling the pictures I was drawing as well. Just
Nice.
disruptive. But I'll say, once I got into maybe senior year, like in high school, I was looking at like, all right, I don't know if there's a lot of, I guess actually before going into high school, I think maybe last year, middle school, going into high school, I kind of got this sort of notice of from an art school saying, it's kind of childish, and just killed my confidence. And I stopped drawing and kind of shifted into more of the creative writing and things of that nature, and really didn't know what the direction was going to be. So I was looking at either going into engineering, specifically robotics, or going into like a business school. So me selling my comics was early me being an entrepreneur. But by the time I got to Morgan State University, great, business program, and I chose business as my major, I took an African diaspora class, and it just opened me up. Like, this is what, 2003, just opened me up. Like, yeah, let's explore. Let's learn more about this. I wasn't quite in that vein, but definitely it got me very interested. I didn't get into the vein of changing my major, but it opened my mind up, I'll say.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So let's see. So coming out of like college, and so talk about sort of that journey. And I know you touched on a little bit like early, but talk about that journey into curation and like sort of this, like having the background, imagine the major and all really kind of informed, like this is the direction I want to go. But talk about that, some of the decisions and some of the opportunities that came out of that path.
Yeah. So when I first like redeclared or changed my major to East Asian Studies, I changed it without an end goal in mind. I remember my family asked me, "What are you going to do with that major?" And so my first art job actually was when I was a sophomore
Mm,
in undergrad. So I went to school at Colby College in Waterville, Maine. And during my sophomore year, I worked as a research assistant for one of my art professors. And what I had to do was just to catalog her collection of art slides. Like this was back in the day when professors used a slide projector for their art history seminars. And so in that job, I think it was just the process of cataloging each of the slides. It First of all, it forced me to just be exposed to a large quantity of Asian artworks. All, even though I was exposed to them through slides and not the actual objects, it was just still one after the other, just being exposed.
yeah.
And so it was an educational experience nonetheless. But I feel like looking back now, I can sort of like point to that time as when after seeing all these gorgeous artworks, and they look gorgeous in the slides, I wanted to actually see them in person. And I feel like that's what distinguishes an art historian from an art curator.
Yeah.
As an art curator, I do have the privilege of handling and just spending time with an actual object, like right there in front of me. And, I'm insured to handle these precious artworks. Art historians, they don't necessarily get to be with the artworks that they study
Right.
as often or as easily as a curator does. Like we sometimes facilitate, scholars' visits to see the objects in person, but they get like a day or two to spend with the object versus what I can do every day. And so I think that really sort of put me on the path of, okay, what can I do? What kind of career would allow me to be with an art object, so regularly and easily? And also that's become one of my primary curatorial philosophy: start with the object. So like, what can the object tell you?
Yeah.
Where can it lead you to, in what path can it lead you to ask questions? And so start with the object.
That's a great philosophy there. As I start to think about, like, I guess the curation that goes into collecting interviews and so on. It's definitely not the same. I'll never give myself that, but there is an intention that goes into it. And I think figuring out where you want to start off at, like you're saying, start off with the object, right? And I think with doing this, what have you, start off with sort of the conversation, which you're aiming to get out of the conversation. It's not like every person with a paintbrush, should
Yeah.
come on. It's like, all right, what is there merit within this conversation? Is there something that can be gained and something that, I can learn? Because at the end of the day, it's always for me. But is there something that could be learned from this? So thank you. I steal from you artists and I steal from you artists and you guest types. I steal from you. I steal from all of you. I'm using this to better myself. That's what this is. So, excuse me. Let's see.
Yeah, but I do have to say that what really opened my eyes to the possibility of curation as a career was, again, Colby College was fantastic. It was for, the first person in my family to go to college. It was the ideal environment to really, hold my hand and sort of offer me exposure to all kinds of things. Because in sort of like my junior or senior year, there was a seminar given by some of the art professors. It was called Museum Exhibition like 101 or something like that.
Yeah.
And so it was a seminar of like 8 students. And the goal of the seminar was to launch an exhibition with the College Art Museum. So basically, from ideation all the way to completion. And so it was an intensive training. You learn how to come up with an exhibition idea by, going into the storage and figuring out, okay, what objects do we have in this collection? What would be a fascinating show that based on the objects that we have? Then you learn how to write, object labels for them, do research, edit a catalog, hang the objects. And then you get the fun part where you have the opening party,
Very fun.
Yeah. So from that seminar was great in that it solidified for me what I was hoping for was this is an actual career. There are people who get paid to do this, and it feels like it's something that I would love to do. And so kudos. I give much gratitude to that seminar.
It's great having that experience. I mean, I can see it on your face right now. We have the listeners don't have the visual. We have this visual right now, and having that opportunity and that sort of realization that this thing that I'm interested in, this pursuit that I'm interested in, it's like, oh, this is how it actually works, and it's like everything starts clicking and everything starts coming together. You're like, wow, this is amazing.
Yeah. Well, when did it start to click for you? As
I don't know,
a podcaster.
I'll say like, years and years and years ago. I've been doing this for about 14 years, and just I was one of those guys who was very interested in some of the weird news stories, and that you would hear like on the radio in the morning, and I would oftentimes be looking up these stories like, wow, what's weird that's happening in the world right now? And I would look up that stuff, and I started hearing it on the radio, and it's like, okay, there's a lane for this, and it starts to click. And I found a podcast from one of my favorite film directors, and he started kind of like revealing certain things he used to make a podcast, to do a podcast. And this is way back in 2009. And I was just like, oh, I can actually try this out. And really being self-taught, having a few of those like opportunities to chat with people who are producers, just to get a better sense of what gear should I get to go along this journey further. But really being self-taught, but getting sort of that, these are two guys having an interesting conversation and I'm captivated. And how can I bring that on? So in doing this particular podcast, I give all the credit to one of those sort of turning points. All of the interviews I enjoyed, they're all great. But I'll say, interviewing folks, like I did an interview with Rebecca Hofberger, and that was kind of the one of, I'm decent at this. I'm pretty good at this. And I was like, I got to keep going, keep trying to like go after that sort of magic and being curious. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to shift gears a touch. Could we talk a bit about Across Asia, Arts of Asia and the Islamic World?
Yes, with pleasure.
So yeah, please.
So Across Asia, Arts of Asia and the Islamic World, it is our re-envisioning of the Walters collection of Asian and Islamic art. And, we consider it a landmark installation for us because it is the first time in the museum's history whereby we are able to present Asian art and Islamic art together in a contiguous physical space. Yeah. Previously, we've had these two collections in separate spaces, but we really wanted to put them together in a contiguous space because historically, the various cultures across the Asian continent have had periods of interactions and exchanges, and we wanted to make sure that we can tell those stories. And it made total sense then to put them all on the fourth floor of the museum. And so we opened in April, so only a few weeks ago, and visitors will find that, on display, like over 500 objects representing the cultures and traditions of East Asia, South and Southeast Asia, and the Islamic world.
It's great. It's great. And I like that notion of bringing this is this type of art. This is this. It's like, no, all of it should just come. Can we bring it together? Can we just, here? No? All right, cool. But I like that that's what's happening. And, I'm going to visit very soon. It's been a crazy couple of weeks. But I wanted to get a sense from you, like you were touching on it earlier, like as far as coming up with and working on this exhibition, like being co-curator here. Talk about like the experience of bringing together and shaping the narrative for this exhibit.
Mm-hmm. Well, so there were there were actually three curators working on this installation. Myself, Ani Prozer, who is the senior curator of Asian art at the Walters, and also Ashley Dimig. She was the former Wheeler Mellon Fellow in Islamic Art. She has left us now, and she is now a director of a gallery at University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. But during her time here, all three of us worked together on this installation. And, so three curators. The potential for conflict is very high, with three different perspectives and three different egos. But actually, we were a great team, actually, great. I'm very happy with the fact that we were a great team. And we were actually on the same page about our priorities for this installation. We knew that we wanted to work with the strengths of the collection, because the collection was formed by the Walters family, the father and son team. And they're individuals, they're humans. And so they have their own interests, and their collection really reflect their individual taste. And so that means there are some stories that we can't tell from beginning to end. We can't get 5,000 years worth of history from the collection. Sure. And so we had to work with our strengths. But we also wanted to uplift underrepresented voices and perspectives. And so we did that we had a few different strategies to do so. And then finally, we wanted to sort of highlight these historical connections when possible. That was one of the main reasons why we wanted Asian art and Islamic art to be together in one space, because there was a long history of connections across this vast continent. And so those were our goals. And one of the first steps that any curator will have to do for any installation exhibition is to come up with the object list. And this was a massive undertaking. It took multiple years. And, we have 9,000 objects in our collection covering Asian Islamic art. And you're only seeing 500 in the galleries.
Right.
And so the first thing we had to do was to decide the first round, we managed to get, I think, 1,000 objects on the list out of 9,000. So, the first round was like a gut check. You just go through images. You're like, yes, no, yes, no. Sort of just working off of our own gut, but also, from our training and education and knowledge. And then the subsequent rounds was to keep refining the list until we got down to about 500. And you do that refinement by, going into storage to look at the objects that we don't have photos for, because you can't say yes or no until you know what it actually looks like.
Sure.
So that's one round. And then another round would be, okay, you have a smaller list now, and you know what every one of them looks like, and they're in good condition, whatever. So now it's what stories do these objects tell us? So sometimes you get a good group that automatically there was an organic story that emerged, and you're like, oh, perfect, that group stays. But then you have other objects that, no matter how hard you try, you just can't, they just don't fit anywhere. They don't fit in the multiple ways that you're hoping or that the other objects are telling you it needs to be. Yeah. And so those are the objects that eventually you got to cut. And, we were cutting objects up until the last week of install. Don't tell anybody that, but
no one listens to this.
but it's normal. Actually, it's quite normal.
Well, I want to interject real quick, because I like having those sort of unexpected parallels. Immediately reminded me of a film editor. It's yeah, if we had to trim this out, the movie was 2 hours, we got it down to 90 minutes. We were editing to the day of, But I think it's something very, very interesting in trying to balance, this is a really cool item. This was a really cool object. This was a really cool scene, when you're kind of trimming down from a large number I think you said 9,000, right? Mm-hmm. To 500. Mm-hmm. That is a large drop. And I look at it now in doing this as I kind of made that comparison to curating in this. There are folks that'll reach out and it's like, I don't know if that fits right now. I for these reasons and having sort of a rubric there. So in looking back, were there any sort of like challenges where those sort of egos came back and forth? It's like you can work together great, but it was it one of those like I'm married to this item. I love this object right here. Was it one of those instances or any object for you that really sticks out that you're like, that is the best piece?
Well, I have to say that the biggest challenges were actually kind of almost out of our control. And, over the past 4 years, I think everybody would agree the pandemic was the biggest challenge, the most unexpected. And so, that disrupted, the fabric of just our lives, daily lives in general. But that certainly for this project, it not only delayed the opening, but, it delayed, it really put a roadblock on those initial stages whereby we had to like go into storage to view the objects in person. And so, it took us a while, like everybody else, before we were able to work up a system where individually we reserve time by ourselves in storage to view, 100 objects. And then next week we'll do that again and again, etc. So that was a challenge that was unexpected, totally out of our hands. And sort of like related to the pandemic and people's shifting priorities because of it, that also partly forced us to deal with the challenge of having significant turnover in staffing in several departments across the museum that we work with in order to, an installation like this takes the entire museum, all the teams to work together to make it happen. And so when we have, not enough staffing to help us with the project, that was a major challenge. I mean, like ultimately, for example, we ended up working with three different designers on this work, on this installation. And basically the most important way that we overcame that challenge was to give each other grace. I mean, I think grace and compassion.
Yeah, I think understanding that, like in doing this, because this is sort of the connection point that I have, and this is the medium in which we're, I find like when you're working with different folks, you have like a calendar, they have a calendar. And I think a few of the different byproducts that have come out of the pandemic, maybe culturally speaking, is that, folks had that moment of reset, but then sort of like the way that the engine that is this country and the world works is go, go, go. We don't have time for this. And I think it's that much more important when you're having sort of these person to person interactions, whether it's working with that sort of whole museum staff or, even in instances where let's say a graduation, because I know it's commencement season for a lot of schools, right? And it's a lot of times all hands on deck, and you want to make sure that, you're giving folks sort of that space and acknowledging that anything can happen.
Yeah.
Like COVID is still very real for sake of argument, and all these other things can pop up that can delay something. So giving folks sort of that grace and recognize that we learned something about these pivots, being able to consistently pivot.
Yeah. And it was also through little Zoom boxes, even. It wasn't even in that, like giving each other grace in person. It was giving each other grace and being compassionate via small boxes on our screen. It was wild.
The compassion emoji in the Zoom.
Yeah.
Prayers up,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also another major challenge that was definitely unexpected. Well, I can't say unexpected, but definitely out of much of our control from the very beginning was, the Black Lives Matter movement, and then the calls for social justice, and also sort of related to that was like this lens on museums in general, sort of like forcing us to really look inward and ask ourselves to reconsider, like, what have we been doing? And so like I can definitely say we were one of the slower museums to um, go public with our support, but we were thoughtful in our slowness. That was one of the reasons why we were slow. But, you know, to be, sometimes I feel like I'm mid-career as a curator, but, it was, in the end, I definitely think it was fantastic for the museum field to have been forced culturally
Yeah.
to consider our past and where we're headed. And so, but that, for the day to day, how it affects me as a curator day to day, it was more like, man, what stories do we want to tell with our historical artworks? What voices do we want to uplift? And so it was a fundamental shift as well in, 5 years ago, these artworks were presented a certain way. 5 years later, no, they're not. They are keeping up with the times. They need to keep up with the times.
That's huge. And, I think in living through it and recognizing it and being of a certain age, I'm from the 80s as well. I think it gives us sort of like a context and a sort of an understanding of what's happening around us and being able to read through it. I did an interview that unfortunately I couldn't have used because it's just the audio quality wasn't great, but it was sort of the beginning of, I think here, one of the earlier stories about sort of the Asian hate, like nonsense, I'll put it. I was like, isn't it like Chinese New Year? I was literally just thinking, because the person like pinged me, it's like, this is happening. And the person I was interviewing, the Chinese, it was this just really weird like time. And I even look at, I'm a 6'4" Black man from Baltimore. It's just the reality of the situation. So that's me. It's baked into who I'm interested in talking to and what I might find interesting. It's my perspective, it's my sensibilities, right? So I remember speaking about a few different things using the sort of social media platform and kind of like who I might be interested in talking to and so on. Some of the DMs, you're only talking to these types of artists. You're only talking to this type of artist. And I was like, talk to everyone. And here's examples. But since we're doing this, and, we sort of have this habit. And I think having that moment to wait, some people may say it's too slow and so on, but I think being thoughtful, it's a word that people throw around a lot. They don't know. They're saying thoughtful and intentional. They don't know what they mean. Sometimes it's not instantaneous. And I think when you're taking the time to put in care, it's not in action. It's, like, what do we think about this? What is the message? How do we get this right? As far as how are we behaving, what is our messaging and so on? Because there are a lot of places, I think, what's the terminology? You can't quite put the genie back in the bottle. Mm-hmm. So if you say something that's wrong, tone deaf, that just doesn't match, you're going to get called out on it. So being able to be thoughtful and mindful of what is the approach and are we on the same page across an institution, culturally, what have you, I think that's where that time and that work has to go in.
Yeah.
So let's see. I got two more real questions. Mm-hmm. Then I got those aforementioned rapid fire questions that you won't escape. You won't escape. No one escapes them. So we love the parties. We love seeing that the sort of the work going up and all of that, the objects and all of the great effort that's being put in on how an exhibition is laid out and all of the thinking and just the process overall. Thus far, what would you say is like one of the most rewarding moments or achievements that you've experienced as a curator or as a scholar? Because, that's another thing. I may have saw some writing in there, I was doing a deep dive. So talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I'd say one of the first experiences, one of my first proud moments was when I first started out. So right after grad school, I went to the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco, and I worked as the curatorial assistant of Chinese art. Now, curatorial assistant is sort of like the bottom of the totem pole. This is when you get your foot in the door in the field. And so living in San Francisco at that time as a curatorial assistant, I had to work a second job, to make ends meet because it's San Francisco. And so I worked as a server at a sports bar, local sports bar, um, and as my second job. So when I published my first article in Orientations magazine, this art trade publication, I was so proud, and my manager at the sports bar was also very proud of me. And so he scanned the pages of the article and he emailed it to headquarters, to sort of like say, hey, look what our, employees are doing, So that was very, I loved that. I was like, oh, a little boost of confidence, from all sides.
That's really cool.
And so that was my first really proud moment as, someone, as an art scholar. In the spring of 2011, I was selected to be part of a trip to Japan that it was supported by the Japan Foundation. And this trip was basically a group of curators, art curators, and specifically also Asian art curators who were interested in also working with, contemporary art and or contemporary living artists. And so they took us to Japan, and it was the trip was so eye-opening because not only was I able to just be exposed to, the living, thriving culture of Japan and go to all the wonderful art museums and cultural heritage sites, but because the emphasis was also on contemporary art, I was also got to just experience sort of like from the Japanese point of view, what they found fascinating in the contemporary art world. And so, but this was also during the time when the earthquake happened with the nuclear meltdown. And so on that personal level, it was, I made great friends with the group of people that I was with because you went through that traumatic experience together and you really do remain close after that.
Yeah.
But that was a transformative trip, like professionally and personally.
That's wonderful to have that experience and be able to take in the culture. I think when I do the majority of my interviews, Baltimore based with Baltimore folks or what have you, and when I do sort of the Truth in This Art Beyond, I make it a point to go to the place.
Mm-hmm.
It's something like the whole sports thing, said sports bar earlier. So the whole sports thing is like, oh, this is an away game, I guess, and I'll do it that way. And I'll share this. I have a buddy from the Japan American Society in Philadelphia, and I was just like kind of like having kind of shared with him, I think off mic, this sort of experience I had a couple years back. I called it my weird long like kind of Japanese weekend, where one of my buddies and we flew from Baltimore to Los Angeles for the Anime Expo was happening, which was a backup thing for us because we were there, and I put it this way, to see sweaty Japanese men wrestle. We were there for Japan, New Japan Pro Wrestling, and it was their first show in their 45-year history in the US. So I was like, yeah, we got to go. So we go there, and then it's like, let's check out, Little Tokyo in LA. We started just doing all of these different things, and it was this through line. And the only thing that was not on point, and it's just maybe poor choosing. I'm a bit of a sushi snob, and I just did not have good sushi there. That was the only thing about it. But it was just like being around it. And I wish that, and this is a couple years ago, but I wish that I had sort of the background in doing all of these interviews to go there and relive that experience a little bit. The Anime Expo, I sat there, me and my buddy sat there with a group. They were Japanese photographers that were there. And I was like, we're here with the like real people. We're not like the fanboys. We're here hanging out with the photographers. We're getting a whole different vibe.
Yeah.
Hey, what do you find interesting about this whole thing? So that was a really cool experience.
Awesome.
Just the culture thing for me,
Yeah. Yes. Definitely when you get the opportunity to be there in person and just absorb, soak up the culture. And, I've had the fortunate opportunity to not only go to Japan, but I've also lived and worked in China as well. And so I have not been to Korea. That's on my bucket list, professionally speaking. I need to go to Korea sometime in my lifetime.
I'm slightly jealous. That's the thing. I'm not jealous when it comes to the flight component. Like
Hmm.
me and my partner, we joke about it because she was like, I can just cross my legs and go to sleep on the plane. I was like, you're 5'10". I was like, that 18-hour flight from here to Japan. I was like, I am 6'4". It's not going to work out. I was like,
Yeah.
everything is small, right? I was like, what are we doing? So
Yeah.
this is the last question I have, and this is
Oh, but first I have to
yeah,
say, I
please.
would be remiss if I didn't say that installing across Asia is the most recent moment of pride for me as a curator. Because I don't know if you know, but it is actually relatively rare for any curator to get the opportunity to be able to re-envision and reinstall an entire collection. Some curators go a whole career without having had that opportunity. So I am very grateful that I got to work with like two great colleagues and a great team to do that.
Thank you. That is definitely a feather in the cap and a milestone.
Mhm.
So this is the sort of last real question here, and this is more around the sort of framing of like advice. You mentioned mid-career, right? So what advice would you give to aspiring curators of all types, art and so
Yeah.
on? Because here, but what advice would you give as far as like approaching curation, how to just like progress in that lane, if you will?
uh, I think number one is be curious because, 50% of my daily work is thinking about the artworks, doing research on the artworks. And, even though my education and training was specifically on Chinese art, most curators have to oversee all of Asian art, for example. And so, that's a tall order. And so you have to be curious to be able to, get that daily dose of, just excitement and passion. Otherwise, it's just going to be an overwhelming task for your entire career, kind of thing. Um, Another advice would be to seek fellowship and collaborations, not only, across the museum, but also across within the field. Because, for a long time, curators have had this um, perception that we work in our ivory tower, isolated. That's no longer the case. You know, work is in order to make our especially our historical collection relevant to new audiences. Like we need our colleagues' perspective. They're there on the floor, they're engaging with visitors. They have more of a pulse on what is important now to our visitors. And so fellowship and collaboration is key. Be adaptable. Who knew the pandemic was going to happen, kind of thing. And it always happens. There's always challenges and roadblocks, always in any project. And then finally, screw perfectionism. Because you got to make deadlines. As you said, every team member has their own deadlines, has their own list of deadlines. And you got to learn as a curator to know when good is good enough. You have a deadline. This is good enough for what we want to achieve. And, you know, um, you still respect what you produce. It's good enough, move on. And that's how projects get finished. That's how the team accomplishes together.
Thank you. You see, I was looking for one. You gave us four of them. I mean, that's overachieving. I love it. Speaking of four, I might have five, but I want to hit you with these rapid fire questions. As I tell everyone, don't overthink them. They're goofy questions, but they're a little bit about you. It takes us behind the curtain, So here's the first one. Uh, what is your go-to comfort food?
Oh, it is instant ramen, I have to say.
Any particular flavor?
Specifically the brand Top Ramen beef flavor.
See, I like that. I like that. See, when we're having the ramen conversation, right? It's like which flavor? It's like the high school conversation here. Which high school did you go to? Just so we, just so we have a sense. I was shrimp for a long time.
Oh, no, no, too light, not enough punch. But also the way that I make instant ramen, I don't use the broth. So I cook the noodles and then I strain it and then I put the seasoning packet, soy sauce, sriracha, peanut oil, fried garlic, and lime juice. You mix it all up, and it's basically like brothless ramen.
That's the next level right there. I
Yes.
mean,
Yes.
when you mentioned the sriracha, you mentioned the last, like, oh, that's in my lane now. Because come to my place, it's just like you have curry, you have all of those items. It's like, are you just making Thai food? Maybe. Don't worry about it. uh, so let's see.
That combination of sauces.
100%. So let's see. Beach or mountains? What is your preference?
Beach. Everybody who knows me knows I am a beach bum. I want to retire in the shack on the beach.
Love it. Cats or dogs?
Oh, I've always been a cat person, even though my family loves dogs. But I'm a cat person. I love that cats, they don't seek your attention. It's like they're just aloof. So like when I feel like I need comfort, you gotta chase the cat. There's something satisfying about chasing a cat so that they can give you hugs, you know?
This is true. This is true. Yeah, it's a little bit of both. But I've always, in my solo situations, always had cats.
Mhm.
Dogs are goofy. I mean, I like them. They're super goofy. It's just like, here, aren't you asshole? Uh, so, so these are the last two. Um, do you collect? Is there anything in your home, your personal space that you collect?
I collect beautiful empty journals.
That's a great answer.
I love a beautiful cover. If it feels great in my hands, oh, I gotta have it. But I have so many that in my lifetime I will never be able to fill all the pages of my journal collection, which is fine. But I've accepted that. But yes, I collect journals.
I've been trying to get better about the books because on occasion I'll interview someone and they'll send me like, this is a book I really like. So I'm very, I'm very cautious on which books I bring into my space. But there was one that I finished the audio book for that I also have the like the tangible book.
Mm-hmm.
It's the Ganbate book about the basically like Japanese perseverance. And
Yeah.
I was like, hold on, I broke my rule. I have both of these. I have it digitally and tangibly, and I've read it both ways. I was like, this is great. This book must mean a lot to me. So this is the last one. This is the last one. We talked about flowers earlier. Do you have a favorite flower, and what is it, if so?
Oh, I do. I love my favorite flower would be the gardenia because I feel like that has the best fragrance of all other flowers that I've smelled.
So a hot flower take there.
Hmm. Yes. Challenge me. I'll challenge anyone. It has the best fragrance.
And I guess this is the B to it. Like in terms of like sort of the history and the art historian component to it, what is generally like some of the themes that come up with that relationship to like Asian art and flowers?
Well, I feel like I've been studying this topic for so long now that I feel like there's some universal themes that pop up always. By now, I feel like I question, is it a human instinct to like bestow upon natural things such as flowers with meaning?
Yeah.
Sort of like, does that satisfy some innate desire in us to be able to look at a gorgeous flower that naturally grows without our human intervention? Like, oh, it must mean something special. And so I will bestow upon it a special meaning and symbol. You can find that across all, many, many cultures have such a language of flowers or this impetus to understand the natural world in this way. And that's where I currently stand. That's my opinion on that.
Thank you for sharing that. And that is it for today's conversation. But one, I want to really thank you for making the time and coming on this podcast yet again. And I want to invite and encourage you to take these final moments here to share anything, plug the exhibition, plug anything you want to plug. The floor is yours.
Oh, well, thank you. I do personally invite all of our listeners, if you can, please come to the galleries of across Asia at the Walters Art Museum. This was a multi-year project. We definitely poured our heart into this installation, and we really do hope that each of the artworks speak to you individually in some way.
Thank you. And do you want to share the website or anything along those lines, just if folks want to?
Oh, yes. Please visit us at www.thewalters.org, and you can find all of your information for your future visit there on that website.
And there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Dany Chan for coming on to the podcast. And I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art and culture in and around your neighborhood. You've just got to look for it.